Pre-summit events ahead of the US-Africa Leaders Meeting are showcasing the dynamism and depth of the multidimensional cultural and economic ties between the US and Africa. One of Nigeria's leading businessmen and philanthropists, Tony Elumelu, in partnership with the US Department of State, has organized an event to foster relationships and deal-making and highlight opportunities across the US-Africa investment ecosystem. Nkechi Nnanna has more.
Investing in US-Africa cultural and economic ties is the agenda at the Innovators gathering, an evening hosted by the US Secretary of State in partnership with the US Agency for International Development and the Tony Elumelu Foundation. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken underscored the support in catalyzing partnerships between African and diaspora innovators, entrepreneurs, and US capital technology.
Earlier this year in South Africa, I had an opportunity to set out our administration strategy for the region. And at its core, the strategy can be distilled in one word. You've already heard it spoken tonight: partnership. It's rooted in the recognition that the United States and African nations can't deliver on any of our fundamental needs and aspirations for our people, and we can't solve any of the really big challenges we face if we don't work together. So, it's about what we can do with African nations and people, not for them. Let me just very quickly go through 3 ways our administration is working to broaden and deepen those partnerships to foster African innovation. First, we're investing in the infrastructure that provides the foundation for African entrepreneurship. Second, we're investing in rising leaders. Since President Obama created the Young African Leaders Initiative, nearly 5,800 trailblazers from every country in sub-Saharan Africa have come to the United States for academic and leadership training. Third, we are fostering greater engagement by American companies. You're going to hear more about that throughout this week.
At the summit, Africa is tagged as one of the fastest growing startup cultures in the world, and one of the biggest drivers of that growth is calling for mutual benefit and self-reliance in its relations with the U.S.
My message to U.S. was to reimagine your relationship with Africa away from aid and to focus on empowerment of youth and support for sustainable private sector institutions. My subsequent op-ed in the Hill called for a new U.S. engagement with Africa. The fact that we are gathered here in Washington this week shows to a large extent a genuine interest to re-engage in a manner that prioritizes mutual benefit and self-reliance. We see this as a genuine and substantive desire to re-engage with Africa and to re-engage on a basis that benefits us all. The key words are mutual respect, mutual opportunity, and mutual objectives. We appreciate particularly the focus on the private sector.
To amplify the African story and change the narrative, the New York mayor highlights how far the continent has come.
And so I need for my brothers and sisters from the diaspora to understand the moment that you're in right now. You are in a moment right now when, the first time in history, you are seeing power that is not American power, but is African power. But if you don't connect the dots, you are not going to understand the full purpose of this moment. The mayor of the most important city in the most important country is an African. The most important cities in America are headed by Africans. In New York City, the top law enforcement executive, Letitia James, is an African. The head of the Assembly is an African. The head of the Senate is an African. The head of the City Council is an African. The public advocate is an African. The district attorney in the Bronx is an African. The district attorney in Manhattan is an African. All of this chocolate, what are we going to do with it?
The world is recognizing the next generation of African leaders through their innovation and success stories. And as the US Africa Leaders Summit is underway, one thing is clear: Africa must strive for mutual benefits in their relations. Nkechi, Nnanna, Arise News, Washington, D.C.
Well, for more, let's bring in Nkechi and Nnanna, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Good to have you on the show, Nkechi. Ahead of the summit, which starts today, it's the 13th, the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. This being an Innovators gathering, can you tell us more about it?
Well, in a nutshell, Kenneth, that gathering, that Innovators gathering, was just a gathering to bring young African entrepreneurs, young African innovators in partnership with the U.S. State Department and the Tony Elumelu Foundation and other stakeholders. And that event really was just showcasing what young African talents are doing. And it was evident in the International Innovators Pitch Competition, which was sponsored by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. At that event, it had 2,000 applicants and then down to 10 finalists, and we had the top 3 at that event from Ghana, from Kenya, and from Nigeria sort of give us our pitch of their innovations, which was really mind-blowing. And of course, the Nigerian company Startup One called Health Botic. It's a Nigerian startup that is revolutionizing the health sector and sort of digitalizing it in Africa to improve the system. And also, obviously, amongst all the partners that I mentioned in the report, you have the Tony Elumelu Foundation, which is a TEF foundation, which pledged in 2015 $100 million to empower 10,000 African women and men in innovating in entrepreneurship. And the chairman, Tony Elumelu himself, said these partnerships have helped to scale the vision that he had for that foundation, 10,000 Africans in 10 years. And in just 7 cycles, they've surpassed that amount. And now they have really empowered 18,000 Africans. And he really gives that to this sort of partnership that are taking place.
Now, ahead of talks, day one of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, already we've heard that the U.S. has pledged $55 billion for Africa. What are we expecting today?
All right, on day one, very packed, but I'll highlight 3 major events to be looked out for on the day one of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. One, you have the Africa Young Leaders and Diaspora Forum. Now, this forum, obviously, like its name, will be focusing on the relationship that the diasporans in African diasporans have with the U.S. in terms of innovation, in terms of entrepreneurship. And out of that pool, we know that the Nigerian diaspora really is sort of the highest diaspora here in the U.S. in terms of income, in terms of education as well. And after that, that's going to kick off the summit of day one in the morning. And after that, you have an AGOA Ministerial Forum. AGOA is the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, and so there will be a robust debate on trade focusing on that act. That act will expire in 2025, which is just around the corner, and so it's leaving African leaders with some sort of clarity, and there's going to be some big questions being asked about that act. One, does that act, is it compatible with all sub-Saharan nations? And 2, should that act continue? Should that program continue? And if it continues, in what form should it continue? And so these are some of the big questions that will be asked at that AGOA ministerial meeting. You're going to have AGOA trade ministers that are eligible for that act. Nigeria is part of that. You're going to have the African Union. You're going to have members of the U.S. Congress that that will be there, and these are the questions that will be asked. Another thing to note, last but not the least, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari will be speaking also today. He'll be focusing on just energy transition. So these are just 3 highlights of the many events that will be happening on day 1 of the summit.
Thank you so much, Nnanna, for bringing us up to date. That's our correspondent, Nnanna, in Washington, D.C.